can remember when, as a student at Loyola University, I would look at people like some of the likes of you in your younger years and a few activists on Loyola's campus, and I would think to myself, well, maybe they just don't have anything better to do. So I deserved a year in prison much later. I had it coming, huh? And I've now realized that there probably isn't anything better to do than to try to be part of the groups working to change our society, and in a sense working to be on the fringes so that we can occupy the fringes of our society and withdraw our cooperation, withdraw our consent to those which are so readily and so profitably turning their corporations into the leadership of an imperial menace. And so we have our work cut out for us. But I would like to just offer a couple of ideas about how we ourselves can rise up to the occasion. One comes from my experiences unexpectedly over a series of trips to Dublin, Ireland. I grew up out in the southwest side where we were trying so hard to fit in. I barely knew we were Irish. I knew my mother kind of talked funny, and I had some sense of Irish background, but I didn't go over to Ireland until the Sisters of St. Bridget of Kildare, Ireland, called for me to come over from Baghdad to Ireland because they were holding a peace fest, and they were very, very keen on trying to get as many people in Ireland out to protest the 2003 war, because Ireland has a neutral constitution, and Ireland shouldn't have been allowing its tarmac at Shannon Airport for the pit stop, the stop that the U.S. Navy airplanes would make to load up with fuel, but also with ammunition and with new soldiers to go and fight a belligerent, unprovoked war in another country. The Sisters of St. Bridget knew that, and they wanted people to come to their peace fest. How could I not? So I left Baghdad, came back to the U.S., went to Dublin, with plans to go back to Baghdad before the war began. And I gave the best little talk that I could because I felt like, this is kind of a responsibility to contribute the Baghdad point of view, since so few from Iraq could actually be heard. I wanted to amplify that. And then said goodbye to all, went back to Baghdad, read 5 days later that 5 activists at that talk had taken it upon themselves to go out to the tarmac of Shannon Airport and do $2.5 million worth of damage to a United States Navy warplane part on that tarmac. I will tell you that. So, that occasioned 3 more trips back to Ireland in the most elongated trial I've ever been part of. And I know you'll understand me that I'm not trying to pitch this from a faith-based perspective, but I just want to tell you that the judge in this trial, in its 3rd go-round, because the previous 2 had fallen apart, one because the judge had a terrible Irish temper, they wear the little sheepskin wig, and I thought I'd go whee right through the ceiling, and the second because the judge had been to dinner with George and Laura Bush 3 times. So we're on the 3rd trial, the 3rd summer, and the judge, a woman, said, I just want you to understand that there will be no faith-based testimony in my courtroom. It's quite obvious that the 5 were acting from a political perspective. There went their whole defense, it would appear. And I thought, I'm going to look like the albatross for these 5, telling them, well, I was at the Sisters of St. Bridget Peace Fest when they met me. So it didn't look so good. But in Ireland, at the summation of a trial, the barrister can say anything he or she wants. And these 5 defendants had 3 of the best lawyers or barristers in all of Ireland. And so Mr. Nix, who came right out of Central Casting, he had a kind of portly belly and the black gown over that, and the sheepskin over graying ponytail and Daddy Walrus mustache and a booming voice. And Mr. Nix squared off with the judge when it was his time to give testimony. And he began by saying, the greatest pacifist of all time was Jesus Christ. And the greatest political document of all time was the Sermon on the Mount, and I'm about to read it to you. So he read to the judge and the working class Dublin Irish jury the Sermon on the Mount, calling for people to love their enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And at the conclusion of his reading, he then said that the problem with these 5 is that they didn't practice their faith a la carte. They believed in what they'd been taught, and they believed they must practice this faith and try to prevent the killing of innocents. And then he changed his tone, and he started to describe a beautiful day in a Dublin park. He said he'd been watching as children were running up the hill chasing the ducks, and the children were squealing, and the ducks were chasing the children down the hill, and the ducks were squealing, and he said the most universal sound of beauty must be the sound of children at play. And then his voice lowered, his face darkened. He said, they're bombing children. in a swimming hole in Lebanon. Children are swimming in a pool of their own blood. Well, I'd been so fixated on the trial, I'd barely read the newspapers. I grabbed for The Guardian, and I think then I was reading the same column he must have read on the train on the way into the trial, that Israel had bombed a swimming canal in Qasmiya in Lebanon. And that, well, according to the article I read, a father of one of the children, Abu Ishmael, sat on the rim of the crater, his head in his hands, roaring in his grief, Hezbollah here? Only children here, my son here. His son being one of the 3 killed. 7 were critically injured, and a few others survived. There were little plastic sandals caked with mud and blood on the rim of the crater. Well, Mr. Nix, in a sense, was putting all of us on trial. He said, would you not try, if you could, to stop a Hezbollah missile from slamming into northern Israel? Would you not try, if you could, to stop an Israeli missile from slamming into a swimming canal in Lebanon? The problem isn't, did these 5 have a lawful excuse to do what they did? The question is, what's our excuse not to do more? What will rise you? And so I felt like the emissary of Mr. Nix for a trial that goes on and on and on around that question, what will rise you? What does it take? 122,000 Iraqi children didn't reach their 5th birthdays, according to the humanitarian report that was issued on March 7th, 2007. And there should have been an update issued in September of this year, but it wasn't, because when General Petraeus' military report was being prepared, Ambassador Ryan Crocker went to the United Nations, and he succeeded in convincing them not to release their report about the humanitarian catastrophe going on in Iraq, because it might interfere with the optimism that General Petraeus wanted to deliver regarding a surge. Well, those of you who were so active and have continued to be so during the Vietnam War, we can say to General Petraeus and to Ambassador Ryan Crocker and to all of the elites who are running to the bank with their portfolios stuffed with the profit notices since this war, we can say, you want to see a surge? We'll show you a surge. Lyndon Johnson gave us 500,000 surging troops during the war in Vietnam. And what did it accomplish? What did it bring? What can we predict from the surge of troops, from the maintenance of this war? We can't possibly predict that the U.S. troops are going to bring down the levels of suffering, the levels of bloodshed, the levels of violence. It's not feasible to assert that when these troops are over there, they're going to be working alongside Iraqis to defeat al-Qaeda of Mesopotamia. In fact, that very idea seems a little nonsensical the closer you get to the actual situation. What you can predict is the rising profits of corporate greed, bloated and unfettered by any of the aspiring presidential candidates, save, I think I can count 4. But I was so pleased and proud to be with a group of activists in Des Moines, Iowa, sitting in at Giuliani's office, sitting in at Clinton's office, and telling them that we expect them to issue their pledge, their commitment to bring these troops home, bring them home now, bring them home alive, and to pay reparations for the suffering caused. In Senator Clinton's office, Farah Mokhtarzadeh began to read the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's speech delivered at the Riverside Church on April 4th in 1967. And one of the aides, I don't think he was thinking very hard, thought it would be clever to drown her out. So he went in his office and he picked some jazz riff and he turned it on full blast. And somebody from our group handed Farah an air horn, and she continued to read the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King over the sound of the blasting jazz music. And then I think the irony of it must have dawned on the office staff workers within a couple of minutes, maybe less than 2 minutes. They turned off that music, and all were then able to hear the words from the Reverend Dr. King's speech, words that are certainly precursors to Mr. Nixon, words that we can all rehearse again and again, that our actions must match our words. Our actions must match our words as we work together, to bring about an end to the violence. And that we must seek creative, new methods to bring about an end to the violence. And so that's our charge, seeking creative new methods, listening with one another, certainly continuing to pull many, many more people in to recognize more than I recognized when I was on this campus. In Baghdad in 2003, I hit a low. The bombing was day after day, morning, noon, and night. And I had gone to the Al-Hindi hospital. In part, I was dragging myself over there because one of our team members was a doctor, and she really could do something. And I was beginning to feel almost like a voyeur, watching people bring in loved ones torn apart and wounded. And I remember sitting next to a woman who was convulsively sobbing on a bench, and I managed to make out what she was saying, and pretty soon she was in my arms. She was saying, "How I tell him, what I say." And she was the aunt of a young boy, Ali Abbas. And you know, yesterday, or 2 days ago in Giuliani's office before we were arrested, we read the names of the people who had died on that particular day. And I read the names, and after each name we chanted, "We remember you," for each of those family members and perhaps about 100 others. Well, this aunt had a nephew, Ali Abbas, and she was trying to figure out how she was going to tell him that all of his other family members had been killed. She was now his only surviving relative, and he had lost both his arms as well. But BBC Middle East recently, well, not so recent, but at the occasion of the 5th year of this war, when so many of you were organizing to march here in Chicago, BBC Middle East News went to London and they interviewed this young teenager, Ali Abbas, who had lost all his family members and both of his arms. And the interviewer noted that he's become an accomplished artist and he's learned how to paint with his paintbrush inserted between his toes. And he's able to feed himself with his feet. And she asked him, "Ali, what is it you'd like to do when you're older?" And he gave her a very sweet smile, and in perfect English, he said, "I don't know, but maybe I do something for peace." So I have my marching orders. This snip who once said, maybe those war protesters don't have anything better to do. We all have something so much better to do than to collaborate with the warmongers, to collaborate with this particular war. And so it's with great pride that I'm here with you today, knowing that our charge is to do something for peace. Thank you.